NATO shouldn't give Vladimir Putin a justification to continue the conflict. Russia's war in Ukraine is looming as NATO leaders meet in the Lithuanian capital this week. With Sweden's entry almost certain, Ukraine's future in the League is the biggest question on everyone's mind. Ukraine would like to participate. NATO leaders are split on whether to deliver the package. They eventually agreed to extend the invitation to join the coalition to Ukraine, but did not specify when or how, according to the statement. The debate over Ukraine's NATO membership debates whether this will prevent Russia from reinvading Ukraine, or whether it will anger Russia and plunge the entire alliance into war. The bigger question for NATO members should be whether the latter risks are worth the NATO benefits. I believe that this question can only be answered clearly after the war. Bringing NATO membership will not hasten this decision, so the question of Ukraine's participation is premature and not in NATO's interests or peace. Although Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky understands that NATO cannot follow Ukraine in the crisis, this would automatically bring NATO into conflict with Russia. Despite Ukraine's strong commitment to its security, backed by billions of dollars in military aid, the United States and other allies have fought World War III against nuclear-armed Russia. Support Ukraine's last NATO allies, particularly those neighboring Russia, such as Poland, in the hopes of NATO's unique, swift post-war end to Ukraine. They believe that a clear path for Ukraine to join the coalition is the best way to prevent future Russian aggression against Ukraine or NATO countries. Others disagree. The United States is the largest NATO country, but it is not the only one that sees recognition as unnecessary torture for Russia. Germany also refused to make this promise. Allies have expressed strong support for Ukraine, including in several documents, but ensuring that NATO is not drawn into the war remains a priority. For them, the promise of a specific time for Ukraine's future membership is worth nothing more than the risk of further angering Russian President Vladimir Putin. These promises are mostly symbolic. It will not change Ukraine's current situation and will not change NATO's current assistance. For the case of Ukraine, and similar results for NATO, the best outcome would be greater confidence in the Ukrainian government, military and people who may also benefit from some news when the long-awaited offensive begins to come into order. It doesn't matter. Morale at various points in the war played a key role in helping Ukraine's smaller army defeat the Kremlin. War weariness could undermine Kiev's hardships. But the price of this morale will affect Putin's agreement to end the war. The conflict in June showed that Putin's once-held dominance over Russia may be slipping. But Ukraine's threat to join NATO may be the rallying cry Putin needs among Russian citizens and politicians for war. A new survey by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and the Levada Center in Moscow, one of Russia's think tanks, says that 7 in 10 Russians believe that Ukraine's NATO membership will threaten Russia and that preventing Ukraine from joining NATO is Russia's priority. Shows that the greatest benefit of the Ukrainian army, the end of the democratic constituency. If ending the war had meant Ukraine joining NATO, many Russians would have felt differently about their commitment to the war. The discussion at NATO is reminiscent of a similar NATO meeting 15 years ago. Without a joint project, Ukraine and Georgia have the best of both worlds, enough to anger Russia, but no added protection. Russia invaded Georgia within a few months and Ukraine a few years later. From this conclusion, a reasonable person can draw a conclusion. Supporters of Ukraine's NATO membership say the road to NATO will stop Russian aggression. Opponents argue that it is the promise of future EU membership that has pushed Russia off the cliff. But unlike 2008, Russia is at war with Ukraine today and has occupied most of its territory. It is important not to stop the war, but to end it. While I don't agree with the NATO Putin did it argument, I do believe that allegiance to Ukraine after the war would undermine Russia's commitment to peace, and today NATO allies have no way of knowing what Ukraine's acceptance will be. An obstacle? Finally, be rewarded with peace or go under the burden. Leaving Vilnius without a clear path will not satisfy Ukraine today, but it is the best decision for the possibility of future peace and in the interests of current NATO members.